I hesitate to use the term transformation because do we want to be something completely different, or do we still want to help low-income people get affordable housing? So in that sense, we want to still achieve the same objective, but we want to transform the way we do things. So the way we flow subsidies, so instead of flowing subsidy to projects, and which results in we flow subject to the project and we charge really low rents. And that creates some perverse outcomes, both in terms of the optics, that people think they're paying a very low rent, and therefore their desire to go and get a job because they run an RGI system. There's a disincentive to have more income because they'll just get it taxed back through a 30% effective tax rate. There's a disincentive for providers in many cases to be efficient in the way they operate, because if they reduce their subsidy requirements, their subsidy goes down. And the most important part is, under the current system, with very low rents, we don't enable the providers to actually manage the assets well and do good quality repairs and asset renewal and asset leverage, which is more important. You can only leverage an asset if you've got a good cash flow. With low rents, that doesn't happen. So thinking about the subsidy structure, instead of having really low rents and robbing the project of its viability, can we set rents at a realistic level, close to market? And then the people that live in there, they can't afford those rents, so can we provide them a housing allowance or a rent supplement or some form of subsidy that's structured differently than the way it is now? Because if they see the rent is $900 a month, and then they're getting some kind of assistance, for them to then move into the sector, move out of social housing at some point, they're not making a big jump from only paying $250, they're sort of seeing reality better. And the provider is receiving a level of funding through rent revenues that make them sustainable in the long run. There's always going to be a need for government to assist, but should government be there propping up projects, or should it be focused on people? And indeed, that's the focus of the National Housing Strategy, and the provincial strategy is really a people-centred approach. So if we want a people-centred approach, we have to change the funding framework to reflect that. We talk about providers. It's not really a homogeneous group. We have some very different capabilities and capacities across the provider sector. We have in Ontario, ONFA's got almost 800 members. You've got 10, 12 that have 500 or 600 units or more, and you've got 700 with 100 units or less. So they have very, very different characteristics, very different levels of professionalism. I mean, if we want to be a self-sustaining professional kind of sector, we need to think about how do we actually start to get to some kind of scale. What kind of structures do we need? Can we create some group structures, some sort of corporate head office functions that do in your HR, your finance, those big things, and then 10 small providers kind of come together in a club, mutual, and share those services as one model. Another model would be just amalgamating with other, some groups all get together and we get 10, 50 unit providers and have one 500 unit provider, which now can have a professional manager, a professional staff, good asset managers, and be able to actually utilize the asset better. As long as the assets are spread apart into so many small little fragmented pieces, with organizations that simply don't have the budgets to have the staff to be professional, it's hard to talk about capacity building when you haven't got a vessel to pour the capacity into. It's not an easy road, and we're talking large-scale, sort of social change, and these processes take a long time and they take a lot of commitment. So you need commitment both from the funder side, and in Ontario's case, it's kind of got the province sort of sitting there setting the rules of the game. You've got the service managers providing the funding, and then you've got the providers delivering the service. So you've got three agencies, if you will, that all have to change the way they do things, and they all have to line up at the same time. And then, of course, you've got the fourth one being the federal government that's pouring some money into the system, but not alone. Of course, it's relying quite heavily on partnerships both at the provincial level and the local level. So it's not an overnight process. I mean, we're talking probably a 10 or 20 year process to get this right. So I mean, if we're thinking, okay, 2 years from now, we've got a brand new modernized system, I think it's an incremental process, which is why I think it's more of an evolution than it is a transformation. It's not a flick of the switch. It's a growing together. It's a set of relationships, building, capacity building, starting to do things differently. You'll get some more progressive leaders, providers that are much more keen and able to innovate and do things differently. And then you'll have the laggards, and they'll sort of sit and wait and see what's kind of going on, and they'll come along slowly. So I think it will be a long process, and as I say, it takes a collective commitment and some strong leadership.